Sashi Bukki Shuji Meto Dan Rira Lenshin Yende Genpa Dia Sangye Shindu Mete Uwagi Doku Nanda Jinga Chupa Jo Irang Guru Rana Mandala Kamne Yeta Yami Sangye Chedan Zogi Chonam La Janju Badu Dani Gazu Jie Dagi Cheche Gebe Sunangi Dola Benche Sangye Tuba Shu Sangye Chedan Sogi Chonam La Janju Badu Dani Gazu Jie Dagi Cheche Gebe Sunangi Dola Benche Sangye Tuba Shu Sangye Chedan Sogi Chonam La Janju Badu Dani Gazu Jie Dagi Cheche Gebe Sunangi Dola Benche Sangye Tuba Shu. Okay, so feedback or questions or reactions to last time? Anybody? I got into some heavy material, and it's usually stuff that people do react to, even though I didn't hear anybody give feedback. In particular, I went through some of the qualities to look for in a spiritual guide. And then I told kind of a scary story about a guy who abused a monk and then the, the karmic effects that hit him. And so I know that's unusual for our culture. And so if anybody had thoughts or misgivings, please do bring them up. Um, but I should probably tell you what it says because um, in like most theist traditions, there are like for instance in Christianity, there are the Ten Commandments. And I think one of the first commandments is love thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul, or something like that. Um, but there's a sense that when you encounter a supreme being or your creator, you should send love and not hate, right? Kind of thing. So in Buddhism, since there's no posited creator, because the Buddhist framework is everything arises from cause and effect or karma, then really who we look to for some kind of hope or some kind of refuge is beings who have completely purified themselves. In this case, a spiritual guide is viewed as somebody who's like a Buddha or similar to a Buddha. So, as I said before, a Buddha is somebody who's totally purified their mind of any kind of afflictions so that they no longer are under the sway of ignorance, hatred, desire. And it's somebody who's eradicated any obstacles to knowledge. And so I know this is hard to believe, but I've seen it for myself. So I believe it now. I didn't when I first encountered Buddhism. I remember hearing a story from Sakya Lama, Khenpo Kelsen Gyaltsen, um, about a teacher who had gone up a mountain to meditate, and he was gone for 20 years. And his friends down in the valley got together and said, I wonder what happened to him. I wonder if he's still alive. And so they sent an emissary up the mountain with a block of tea. And he got about halfway up the mountain and he thought, this is a lot of tea. Even if he's alive, he's not going to need all this. And so he went behind a rock and he cut the block of tea in half and he hid half for himself. So when he came back down, he could get it. And so when he finally got up the mountain, their friend indeed was alive. He was preparing um, tea for them to drink, and he gave him some hardened Tibetan cheese. And so the guy reached for his knife to cut the cheese, but he couldn't find it. And the meditating monk said, Oh, you left your knife down the hill when you were cutting our tea." And so the guy felt totally embarrassed because he thought he was doing this outside of the awareness of the meditating monk. But no, monk knew exactly what's going on. Bobby, you have your hand up. So,
I do. I have a question. This actually came up in a discussion I had elsewhere recently, and it has to do with just Buddhism in general and all the many enlightened beings that it has, be they, well, tantric deities, we know what those are, and then, but bodhisattvas and all kinds of different names. Anyway, question is, it's really hard to pin down whether or not these or when these are viewed as actual beings or extensions of one's own qualities. So I'm just curious,
yeah.
and I don't know if it's me or, but there seems to be an active hesitation to actually answer that question. Like, do is it actually something that you're praying to? And if so, if it's an external being, then when is it appropriate to ask for intercession and when not?
Oh, I had this debate with early on when I became Buddhist with my housemate. Sharon probably remembers her. Her name was Peg Brenner. And she was the one who undertook renting a house where we had our first set of teachings with our Lama coming down. And every time we would have this debate, I would have the opinion that there were actual external beings who were completely enlightened. And then her point of view was no, those are just projections of our own minds. It's our own mind that creates the sense of this enlightened being. And so this debate went on for years. And what would happen with us inevitably is whenever we were in the middle of a heated debate, our teacher would come down for a weekend, a teaching weekend, and he would answer the question during the weekend, even though we never asked it of him. So it happened like clockwork. And so this is a little getting a little bit ahead, but actually I think it's okay because it's in the context of what you asked. In most rituals where you summon enlightened beings in front of you, there's two parts to the summoning. There's an imagination of, like, let's say you're summoning the Buddha in front of you. At first, you start with your imagination. You kind of picture a Buddha made out of light in front of you, surrounded by other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That's called the Samaya being or commitment being. Um, in Tibetan, that's called Sikpa. And so, yes, that's totally your mind. That's imagined this enlightened being in front of you. But what my teacher used to say again and again is that if a being was not completely enlightened, they wouldn't know that you're wanting them to come and be with you. If they didn't have compassion, they wouldn't care. Even, even if they knew you wanted them to come, they wouldn't really care, you know. If they didn't have the ability, then they couldn't come. But you said a fully enlightened being has all those three qualities completely perfected. And so there's an omniscient quality to their mind, so they can see everything exactly as it is. In fact, sometime I'll read you a description of all the qualities of an enlightened being, and it'll blow your mind. One quality is while their minds are completely absorbed into the lack of self nature in all things, at the same time, they can see all relative things exactly. And it says as clearly as a palm held in the palm of the hand. So they can see all relative truths exactly as they are, but they can also see their absolute nature. So that's one quality of the mind of a Buddha. There are many, many. Um, so the sense is, yeah, they know it's like Santa Claus. They know what you're doing, kind of thing. Um, and because their compassion, it's described as 100,000 times more intense than a mother's love for her only child. It's considered they can't help themselves because they've fully developed their compassion and their love. So if they hear you in distress, or if you're wanting something, they will come. And it's very easy for them. That's the third quality. Can they actually come? Um, this gets into in Christianity, they say there's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You've heard that, right? So that's kind of breaking down divinity into three parts, which goes to the Buddhist thought that if something has parts, then it can't be self-existent because there are different parts to it. So even from that Christian doctrine, then that would be saying that God is not self-existent because there are parts, right? Um, in Buddhism, they call it the Trikaya, the three bodies. And that can be further broken down into what's called Rupakaya and um, Dharmakaya. So what's Rupakaya? What's Dharmakaya? The Dharmakaya is the mind of the Buddha, and it becomes fully perfected by the accumulation of wisdom over eons of practice and study and meditation and things like that. But through that purification process, all the obstacles in the mind get cleared out. It's like if you put your clothes through the washer, it clears out all the stink and all the stains, right? And so the way that a Buddha does this, the way they arrive at that state is by eons of practicing on immersing their mind into the absolute nature of reality. And that's burning away every time they do it. It burns away obstacles from their mind. Eventually, the mind becomes completely pure. It's relative. I mentioned last time or the time before what's called Buddha nature that we all have. And there are two forms of it. The Rangshan Nedrik, the naturally abiding form of Buddha nature, is the empty nature of the mind, that the mind arises in dependence on the previous moment of mind, and therefore it does not exist independently or by itself. So that lack of independent nature is called the naturally abiding Buddha nature, or Rangshan Nedrik. That part we have. That part of our mind is the same as a Buddha's naturally abiding Buddha nature. There's no difference. When a Buddha is fully purified, the other part of the Buddha nature, which is called Gegurkirik, the developing Buddha mind, which is the relative clear light nature of the mind, when that's been completely purified, um, that empty nature of the mind becomes called Svabhavakakaya, which means the nature body of the Buddha. It's always been there, but it's completely free at this point because all the stains of the relative part of the mind have been removed. That relative part of the mind that gets purified, the clear light nature of the mind, becomes called Jnana Dharmakaya, which means the wisdom mind or wisdom body of the Buddha. And that's the part that's omniscient. So those are the two parts of the Dharmakaya. That's the Dharmakaya part. You can't see it, but it's the mind of an enlightened being. Now, based on the compassion, the Buddha makes causes for developing the ability to appear to beings and to be able to teach them. And that's called the form body of a Buddha. So when that mind becomes completely purified and completely enlightened, all of the virtuous conduct over eons of time that that bodhisattva has gone through become the cause for rupakaya, the form body. Because anyway, that's been the whole journey of the bodhisattva. Their whole goal from the beginning was to wake up completely to help all beings. So that rupakaya has two parts. The subtle part of the virtue manifests as what's called sambhogakaya, which means the enjoyment body. I think this is very similar to the Christian idea of the Holy Spirit, because the qualities that are attributed to the sambhogakaya, the enjoyment body, are that it um, is the aspect of an enlightened being that stays always in a pure realm. I mentioned that when somebody becomes enlightened, it said that they're in like a heaven. And that's the maturation of all their conduct of the six perfections over eons of times. It manifests in their own paradise where they can bring beings to nurture them and bring them to enlightenment. So in Christianity, they would say Jesus is in heaven, you can go there, right? And a Buddhist was saying, yeah, maybe. That's right. And so let's take the Buddha Amitabha. Amitabha is said to have been a bodhisattva over eons who wanted to make a perfect pure land to bring beings into. And it said that his pure land, Dewa Chen, Sukhavati, is the best of pure realms. And that just hearing his name, Amitabha, which means infinite light, will be a cause, if you have any faith in it, to be born there when you die. And you'll be in this paradise, and there are constantly Buddhas teaching and bodhisattvas and really good company. Um, so that quality of that enjoyment body of a Buddha has lots of qualities, one of which is that it's constantly teaching until samsara is emptied. It's constantly teaching beings and guiding them. It also has an ability to emanate everywhere, many places, many forms. But it's subtle. Its nature is the nature of sound. And so the way that that's invoked in Vajrayana practice is through the use of mantra. Mantra, um, one of my teachers said that a mantra is a little bit like saying, Mom, if you're outside playing and you scrape your knee. If your mom hears you, she can't help but come, right, to help you. And similarly, these great beings who've perfected themselves to full enlightenment, when they hear their mantra, they can't neglect you. They've got to come attend to what you're needing, just like a mother would race to her child if her child called out her name. So anyway, that's the nature of Sambhogakaya, but it's too subtle for us at our level to see. That's the part when you pray that appears. And if you get really good at it over time when you're meditating, you'll start to sense the energy shift when you call to these enlightened beings. And you'll start to feel this kind of subtle guidance, but it's more intuitive. It's more at an intuitive level. It's said that when you get very high on the path, you can actually see these subtle forms. And these are the forms that are depicted in Thangka paintings that you'll see various aspects of enlightenment. So that's one part of the Rupakaya, the form body. The other aspect of the Rupakaya is called Nirmanakaya, and that means emanation body. When a being becomes completely enlightened and they've got a pure realm and um, they're on that journey of trying to enlighten all beings, they at some point, many points actually, it said that they'll take a corporeal form. And that's where they actually enter into a womb and they take rebirth in a form that can walk around and talk to people and that people can see and interact with. And it said that the Buddha that appeared a little over 2,500 years ago in India is that aspect of the Nirmanakaya, an emanation body. Some people think Jesus was a Nirmanakaya, appearing for Westerners, but we killed him. so, so, but they didn't with the form of Buddha who appeared in India a little over 2,400 years ago. So those are two aspects of the Rupakaya. So anyway, this is a long explanation, but it's how um, the divine is seen in the context of Tibetan Buddhism. And so it's seen as a force of guidance, a force of love, compassion, wisdom. Um, and if you abuse it, it's really heavy karma. So you don't want to abuse it. And so that's why when you meet a spiritual guide and you start to study with a spiritual guide, there are warnings, be good to them. I remember when Gyumi Khenpo Rinpoche first came to the U.S., one of his main disciples, Geshe Darge, said to all of us Westerners, when he came to live in the D.C. area, he said, take good care of him. He admonished us to take good care of him because it's like a treasure. When you meet somebody who's embodying all that, their only purpose for appearing is to help and guide and lead beings. And so it's kind of our duty as students to not abuse that. Um, Lots of reasons. Um, Shanti Davis said, why get angry if people destroy images, holy images, or things like that? The Buddhas aren't harmed. However, those beings who do stuff like that, it's a big harm to them karmically, right? But the Buddhas aren't harmed. And so that kind of gives a hint of why in Buddhism there's so much emphasis on showing respect to spiritual guides. That's how the Dharma stays alive in the world. That's how people can see it, right? If nobody decided to have a Dharma center, for instance, you would never get to hear the teachings or anything else. Um, so it's thought that that process of showing some respect to Dharma teachers is what keeps the Dharma alive in the world. Serme Rinpoche once said that Dharma is the most powerful force in the universe, but in the world it seems very weak. Right? Why does it seem weak in the world? Well, because there are people with huge egos walking around trying to hoard money and power and cash and killing each other, all sorts of insanity, making total horror for themselves karmically and for each other. And so a very mild, loving being who's trying to say, oh, you should love each other and you should do virtuous things and not harm each other seems weak in the world's eyes. But in terms of the long-term karmic results, very powerful, very powerful. So
Um,
anyway, it's kind of a,
I kind of wondered, I might be wrong, Bobby, but were you also asking about the various emanations of the Buddha, like the medicine Buddha, Amitabha? You know, was that your question?
Yeah, actually, it's you mentioned medicine Buddha. That was going to be my example. So if you do a medicine Buddha puja,
Yes.
that's a very intercessory type of thing to do. It's not just a visualization. If I'm understanding correctly, you're actually asking for help,
yeah,
right?
Well, yes. And
yeah,
it's important when you get an initiation to keep
Right.
doing it if you've made a
yeah.
commitment to it. So,
Yeah, most times when you take an initiation, a lama will say, to keep your commitment, here's what you should practice each day. And they'll tell you something. And it's kind of the student's job every day to remember that, try to come back to the practice. So why there are so many different forms and what do they do for you? The answer to that lies in the path of bodhisattvas. For instance, each of you, if you generate that sense of, I want to become enlightened to help beings, you'll have different people and functions in mind that you would like to do, right? So, a being like Medicine Buddha, one of the things that motivated him in the path of the Bodhisattva was to appear in the times of the degeneration of the teachings. There are 5 degenerations that we're living in one of those times, by the way. It's called the Kali Yuga, dark age. Um, the 5 degenerations are a time when conflict increases, when people's stubbornness increases, when people's wrong views are increasing, when when illnesses are increasing in the world, and there's another one that I'm forgetting, but it's you can see that's the time we're in. So one of the medicine Buddhist's prayers when he was on the path of the Bodhisattva was to appear in that time of the dark age and offer aid to beings. It said as times continued to degenerate near the end of the time of the Buddha's teachings in the world, medicine will get less effective and beings' illnesses will be more insurmountable. And it said that at that time, right before the end of the Buddha's teachings, the medicine Buddhas will actually appear in the world to beings. So by summoning the medicine Buddha, you're appealing to that function that he vowed to complete when he became enlightened. I think there were 12 vows he made that he worked toward on the path of the Bodhisattva. So one of the things about, like, if other examples like White Tara, one of her functions on the path of Bodhisattva was to prolong the life of practitioners and virtuous beings. And so she's usually summoned when you're wanting to prolong your life or prolong somebody else's life. So there are lots of functions like that. The teaching is all enlightened beings have the same level of enlightenment. They've gotten the same realizations. They've gotten the same level of extinguishing obscurations and afflictions, but they have different abilities based on the kind of virtue and aspirations they accumulated on the path of the Bodhisattva. So that when they became enlightened, they got a certain set of skills. And so that's why different forms are appearing and why they're summoned for different things. But they can all lead you to enlightenment. They all have the same level of realization. So, yes, I guess I'm saying yes, there are external beings, but also there's the internal part of your faith, your prayer, and your motives. I heard one Lama, Sherpa Tuku, I was asking him this question at the very beginning when I started practicing, and he said, the hook of a Buddha's ability to help us is about as strong as our hook of faith. When those two things come together, then they can really guide us along. But if that's lacking, then they can't. There's not a whole lot they can do. They may want to. I heard another Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, compare it to flies bashing their brains out against a window. That when you approach them and you're trying to take them outside, they get afraid and they bash even harder against the window. And he said it's a little bit like that for great beings when they're trying to guide sentient beings, because even if they appear in their Sambhogakaya, the being can't see them, but even if they appear in a Nirmanakaya, like Jesus of Nazareth, if they're too hostile, they get hung on a cross like that, and it creates harm for those beings than help. So it's a complicated thing. But the short answer is yeah. And it's considered a good thing to summon such beings. There's a thing called a seven limb puja, which is a way to make merit as you summon them and to request different things, teachings. I heard a very funny story. This was oh, where was he from? It was a lama from Bhutan who came to visit a friend of mine, Lauren Ladner. This was decades ago. And he was telling Lauren and his wife at that time, um, Terry, about a retreat he had been on for a very, very wrathful deity, an enlightened deity, but in wrathful form. In that form of the deity, their function was to overcome evil and defeat evil forces, right? And so he was summoning this being, and there was a time in his retreat where he smelled like burning flesh, and he felt this horrible feeling. And then suddenly, this very wrathful, enlightened being appeared in him and said, "What do you want?" He said at that moment, he was so afraid he was going to be killed that he said, "A long life?" And then this wrathful being said, "Okay," and then disappeared. And then later he said, "What have I done for full enlightenment or attainments?" But I was so afraid I just asked for a long life. Anyway, I thought it was a funny story.
Um, I have a
So,
question.
yeah,
Um, what does it mean when you get like this glimpse of a particular deity that you weren't necessarily praying to? You may have been doing mantras and stuff. Is that just a small visitation or?
I don't think so. I think that's an indication of something ripening from a previous life that you connected to. Um, so for me, I feel like something like that is the Bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, because, well, my story isn't quite as convincing as stories I've heard of people who have these visual appearances of deities and so forth. But for me, it was simply that I started to have experiences in my late teens and early 20s that made me think that the mind might be a continuum. Things like lucid dreams and occasionally out of body kinds of things that happened to me. And so I started reading about meditation and I came across the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, which is the mantra summoning Avalokiteshvara, the embodiment of compassionate wisdom. And so I started saying that. I didn't know what it was, but I just started saying it. And when I met Lama Yeshe at University of California, um, I told him I had been saying it. He went into meditation, and then when he came out of meditation, he looked at me. He said, "You're very lucky. My teacher, Song Rinpoche, will be here in a few months. I want you to go to him and get the Avalokiteshvara initiation." So I did. And then when I came back after getting that initiation, then he told me to do a retreat on it. And then it's been a core practice of mine ever since. Years later, I didn't tell this to my father, but years later, I was talking to my father, and he told me he was trying to dissuade me about meditating. And he told me about a time when he was a teenager. He and his friends had found the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum in a book. And so they had tried reciting it, but nothing happened, so they gave it up. I'm convinced that my ability to um, get those kinds of teachings may have been best based on my father's previous prayers that he didn't put much effort or belief into. But anyway, so I do think that there's a long history that if we could see would be pretty amazing in terms of the effort previous lives
So
put
so
in.
then you would understand why things like that happen rather than, oh my God, what is this?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
gotcha.
So it means somebody in our past lives been doing some good stuff, got us connected up. So, all right. So, any other stuff before we go back into the text? No question is bad. So, Lucy, I can see are you unmuting? Usually the mute button. Oh, there you go.
Uh, Few things just came to my mind. Um, some poets, and I'm reading a book by Mark Nepo, The Book of Awakening, and it's so deep and pure and ethereal. And the I have a book here by Khalil Gibran, it's the Lebanese.
Yeah, Gibran. Yeah.
And it's like they all speak the same way, like metaphor. It's so beautiful. And so I tend to believe they are enlightened.
Well, and that gets back to what Bobby was saying before. In this particular path, there's a belief that there are many, many, many levels of spiritual aspirants, and many stages they go through as they develop. And so at those different levels, they might have different beliefs about how everything works, but basically they're on a similar path in that they're developing their positive qualities and they're trying to overcome their petty qualities like jealousy and anger and greed and things like that. And so any being like that, in a way, is on a spiritual path, whatever their level is. And so a lot of them have been poets or writers or spiritual guides in different traditions. And it does sound a lot alike when you start reading it from
Yeah,
different countries, different cultures. A lot of the stuff that Jesus said, it sounds like Mahayana Buddhism when when you read some of the Mahayana Buddhist scriptures. So,
um, also, I have curiosity to know when we are born, our minds are free of all teachings or society, gender roles. So
yeah,
are we born with like a blank mind, or do we have like this places
I
that
saw, it's funny that you asked that. I saw a quote by Lama Yeshe, my first teacher, on Facebook today, and I shared it. Um, but he was talking about political worries. And he said, face it, when you're born, you don't have any political beliefs or anything. It's just clear mind. And then you start learning ideas and concepts, and then you start getting your sense of how you see the world. And that's when we start having those conflictual kinds of things occur to us, right? And so, yeah, as we die, the coarser parts of our mind start losing their ability to function until only the most subtle form of the mind goes, leaves the body. And then that very, very subtle part of the mind is overtaken by whatever karma is freshest or strongest in our mind to shape what we become next. And so that's why karma is so crucial to be careful about, is that it shapes what we become. But when we start out, then that subtle clarity of the mind is pretty pronounced. And then we learn concepts and everything and go from there. So it's that most subtle part of the mind that we're trying to purify in this practice. and we're trying to awaken it so that it can see things clearly.
No, just last question. Are there more enlightened beings appearing in the world to rescue us from these dark ages, or is it can I be hopeful that this is just a passage and that, in the future generations there will be better ways?
Yeah, yeah, yes and no. The no part of it is that this, from a Buddhist point of view, has been a beginningless debacle. That because of the ignorance in beings' minds, and they don't know how things work, again and again, and these kind of tyrants rise to power and cause all sorts of problems for everybody, and then they die, and then their karma takes them into hideous rebirths, and this happens again and again and again in the world. At the same time, bodhisattvas take birth in the world again and again and again to try to transform it into transformed beings. So yes, even though times are very dark, there are enlightened beings among us trying to help us and take us in a good direction. And it depends whether they're listened to or not, and whether somebody promotes them in the world. Um, they're not very self-promoting individuals, I find.
Yes.
The ones I've had the good fortune to encounter are very self-effacing. Um, but when you get to know them, you begin to realize how deep their goodness goes. And so those are the kinds of beings that in this first teaching, it's guiding us to treasure those kinds of relationships and to value them and promote them. So
I have one question, Wilson.
yeah.
Were you able to summon that deity you were talking about?
Say that again.
Were you able to summon? You said your father was reciting those verses, and he wasn't. Maybe he didn't put the effort in or whatever. But you said you did it also. Were you able to initiate anything with that?
Well, as I said, I've taken it on as a daily practice, and I do feel a connection with something. I've never had a vision like I know some people here have had actual visions of deities and things like that. I can't claim something like that,
Right.
but I can say that when I meditate, I feel really good things in my connection with the object of my prayers. And I feel it transforms where I am mentally and emotionally. Yeah, Bobby. You're still on mute, Bobby.
Sure am. All right. Now I was gonna say for somebody that's new, like myself, and I think you probably know this by now, I'm super extremely cautious. I don't do anything unless I've received some kind of guidance about it.
Right.
And especially when you were talking about things like mantras, I usually associate that with tantra. So anyway, for somebody like me, I don't do mantras because I've not been taught to. So what is the recommendation for somebody like myself to either do them or not to do them, or if done, then how to approach that?
Well, one thing that is always safe is the practice I taught either last time or the time before on taking refuge and
That one I
generating
do, yeah.
energy.
Yeah.
Because that connects you to all the enlightened beings. And it begins that relationship. And so that's, again, you're hooking that because the sense is that these enlightened beings have been there for us again and again. There's this beautiful story of a Sangha who appeared 400 years after the Buddha and was kind of foretold in scripture. And he wanted to see the future Buddha Maitreya. And so he went into a cave and he started saying Maitreya's mantra, and he wanted to have a vision of Maitreya. And after 3 intense years of retreat, he gave up. and it said he left his cave, and it said that he saw these holes in a rock where birds had been flying in and out of them, and their feathers had made the rock smooth. And he thought, if bird feathers can do that, surely I can, over time, get rid of the afflictions of my mind. So he went back into the cave for 3 more years, gave up again, saw another sign, went in for 3 more years, gave up again, saw another sign, went in for 3 more years. And then after 12 years, he said, okay, I'm done. And he left the cave. And it said that he saw this dog by the side of the road who had been injured. The hind leg of the dog was wounded, and there were maggots infesting the wound. And he couldn't help himself. He was overcome with love and compassion for this dog that was so helpless. And so he wanted to remove the maggots from the dog, to try to heal it. But every time you try to get the maggot, you would ask yourself, well, if I take the maggot out, how will it live? I'll be taking away from its food source. And so it said he had a knife and he cut off a slab of his thigh and he laid it on the ground next to the dog. And he was going to transfer the maggots to his own flesh, but next to the dog. But he found when he tried to hold the maggots, they would squirm out of pain because his fingers were rough. And so it said that he thought, oh, maybe if I put my tongue out, they'll climb on my tongue and I can transfer them with my tongue over to the flesh I put there. And he went down with his tongue out to get the maggots. And it was so hideous, he closed his eyes, but he went down, 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 and suddenly his tongue touched the dirt. And there was no dog. And he looked up, and it said when he looked up, there was Buddha Maitreya in all his glory, just luminous and bright in front of him. And his first impulse was anger. He said, I've been praying to you for 12 years. Where were you? And it said that Buddha Maitreya said, I've been here the whole time. Look, here's my robe. Here's where you were spitting. You put stains on my robe from where you were spitting. And so anyway, they had this dialogue, and Buddha Maitreya gave him 5 texts that he brought back into the civilized world, which are just incredibly profound texts. So anyway, that's a way of saying that if you pursue any enlightened being, it may take a while, right? But eventually you'll feel that connection. At some point, it's going to ripen for you. So the refuge bodhicitta is a great way to start. If you have that much faith that you're willing to take refuge and generate bodhicitta each day, 6 times at least, then you're on that path. When you're ready and you want to speed up the process more for yourself, then it's appropriate to ask a qualified teacher for a higher practice. It's called a yidam practice. A yidam is a enlightened being that's meditated on by a practitioner in an effort to kind of embody some aspect of enlightenment. And so I guess I'll turn your question into a question back to you. Are there any yidam deities that you've been exposed to that kind of appeal to you?
Yeah, there are common ones. I don't know a lot of them too. But I mean the ones that I do, like Vajrasattva, for example,
Perfect.
is like if I were to think about it now, that's where I would go. I don't know why. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's just start with Vajrasattva. Vajrasattva is the embodiment of the non-dual wisdom of that brings the mind into a realization of its innate purity. And so Vajrasattva is an excellent yidam to supplicate. So what one would do is seek an initiation where you could do a Vajrasattva practice, and then a teacher would tell you the kind of mechanics of how to do that practice and what the mantra means and all that. And then over time you would practice that. And that's considered a very, very expedient means for purifying negative karma. And so the fact that you're attracted to that, I think, is really wonderful. I'll keep that in mind. In terms of, trying to give you access to it. Meanwhile, where you need an initiation is when a yidam deity like that becomes something that you want to embody or you want to internalize. If you're just devoted in the beginning, you can still supplicate the deity even without an initiation and say prayers to them. And you don't need an initiation to do that. That's called a front visualization, where you imagine that you're asking the deity to come before you and say some prayers to them. Maybe do a 7-limb puja. And I'll explain what that is a little later. But so you can start and then eventually, hopefully, deepen that connection. Does that make sense? Okay.
Can you please tell us a mantra that we
Sure.
meditate on?
Yeah, and in fact, very often when lamas come through a town, people will ask them for what's called a lung, which means an oral transmission of a mantra. And there's no initiation needed. The lama will simply say the mantra and have the student repeat it, and then you can repeat it as often as you want. So since Bobby just brought up Vajrasattva, do you want me to say that mantra, the short one? There's a 100-syllable mantra that you have to know, but there's a very short mantra for Vajrasattva. If you want, I'll say it 3 times and just say it to yourself after I say it each time and imagine that you have that connection. Okay?
Okay.
And by the way Vajrasattva is pictured, you imagine a youthful deity made out of white light, wearing silk, beautiful garments, and he's holding a vajra in his right hand at his heart, and he's holding a bell in his left hand at his hip. And so you're imagining him at eye level in front of you, about a body length away, just smiling with love and kindness. And you cultivate your bodhicitta, and then imagine you're seeking his relationship with that aspect of enlightenment as you say the mantra. And so the mantra is Om Vajrasattva Hum Pe. You're welcome to say that. Om Vajrasattva Hum Pe.
Om Vajrasattva Om Me.
Om Vajrasattva
Om.
Hum Pe.
Om Vajrasattva Om Me.
Om Vajrasattva Hum Pe.
Om Vajrasattva Om Me.
And then you have that, so you have that mantra. As far as the recitation of mantra, there's a beautiful story about a scholar who was riding near a lake, and he heard a yogi on an island in the lake mispronouncing a mantra. And so out of compassion, because obviously this yogi was in retreat and was saying the wrong Sanskrit pronunciation for the mantra, the scholar got in a rowboat, rowed out to the island, and he met with this ascetic yogi there, and he said, "Oh, I just wanted to tell you, since you seem to be doing a retreat, the correct pronunciation for that mantra is, and then he said the correct pronunciation. And then he got in his boat and he was leaving and he heard a splish splash sound behind him. And he turned around and the yogi was running across the top of the water to the boat and said, "How do you pronounce that again?" So don't worry too much about the pronunciation is what I'm saying. But the tradition is to try to say it however your teacher says it. But Om Vajrasattva, Om is the leader of mantras, and it's an invocation of the body, speech, and mind of the Buddhas. Vajra means diamond, and it has a sense of non-duality, and it's referring to a certain kind of wisdom and indestructibility and inseparability. Sattva means a being, particularly a divine being. So Vajrasattva, the Vajra being. Hung is a syllable at the end of mantras, meaning may my mind develop that non-dual wisdom that you have. And pe is a syllable for getting rid of obstacles to that. So that's the meaning of the mantra. So you can say that, and you don't need an initiation to do that. So,
Om Raja Sattva. Om.
Hung pe, yeah. So anyway, so um, that kind of gives you a sense of where guru devotion is in this tradition. The tradition is, even if you're listening to teachings from somebody flawed, then to try to see them in a pure form, because that helps your mind. But that's why I also started with what to look out for, because you don't want to do that with somebody who's a charlatan who's going to mislead you or abuse you in some way. And so at first be discerning about who you go to for that kind of relationship. That's the suggestion. Okay, so that goes back to the very first part of the practice. The text. Should I go back into the text?
I have one last question. Is
Okay.
all the deities, do they have a form like a man or a woman, or they are, both?
Usually they're depicted as either male or female.
Mhm.
Sometimes, particularly in the highest yoga tantras, they're visualized embracing each other. But in the what's called the lower tantras, they're usually visualized solo. But that union is the union of method and wisdom is depicted as a divine couple. That's in highest yoga tantra. So, so yes, male, female, right? There are lots of female Buddhas in this tradition. Tara is an example. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen and then we can get back into the text. Let me call it up. So we did the first two verses. The first verse was talking about the author and his vow to compose the text. And then the second verse, just to remind you, was an admonition to us, the listener, on how to listen to the text. I wanted to say a few words about that I think are important. So you get a sense of what you're listening to and how important it is. Um, this text that we're going through is considered to cover all the essential points on how to become enlightened. And so all of them are contained. It's a very short text. but it's out of a genre called Lam Rim, which means stages of the path. Um, some distinguishing features about the stages of the path. It includes all the subjects of Sutra and Tantra. It is easily put into practice. It has come down through masters of both the profound view lineage as well as widespread activities. I mentioned Asanga. Asanga and Maitreya come down through a lineage that's called the vast activities lineage. And that gets into the activities of a bodhisattva like generosity, morality, and so forth. So it has those qualities, the text that you're about to hear. And there are four greatnesses of listening to it. One is when you hear this completely from beginning to end and you have it in your mind, you can see all the Buddha's teachings as non-contradictory. That's one benefit that you get from listening to this text. Another greatness, the teachings will appear to you as personal advice. A third benefit, you will easily grasp the intent of the Buddha. And a fourth benefit, you avoid the great mistake of disparaging or abandoning any of the Buddha's teachings. And so sometimes if you just hear piecemeal teachings, you might think there are contradictions because you don't understand the whole view of it, or you might disparage one thing or another. If you do that, then it's like putting a big roadblock in your way for future development. There are three features that the teaching should have. It should have been taught by the Buddha. It should have been cleared of any errors that were added later. It should have been it should have been able to bring true realizations to other yogis and yoginis who have practiced it. So in this last verse, the last line, and we went over this last time, Kelden de Dak Dangwei Yiki Nyun, means you lucky ones who are listening to this, listen with a pure mind. So what that means, there's a famous analogy of the three faults of a pot, right? If you have a pot for cooking stew, if you turn it over, you won't be able to put anything in it. No, no stew will go in, right? Similarly, when you're listening to teachings, if you're distracted, you won't really hear what's being taught, and so you won't get the teaching. Another fault of a pot is if it's right side up, but it has a hole in the bottom. And so that analogy is when you hear these teachings, you should try to remember them. If you forget the meaning, then you can't really reflect on it, and it's not going to help you. And then a third fault, let's say you have a right side up pot, it doesn't have a hole in it, but you've been using it as a chamber pot. Well, if you try to cook good food in it, it's not going to taste good. Be healthy for you, right? And so that analogy is used that you should listen with a pure motive. Let's say your motive is, I just want to accumulate knowledge so I know what different religions say, and I can be informed and good at dinner parties. That's not a good motive for listening to this teaching, right? That's more about just this life and wanting, I don't know, social skills or whatever. Or let's say you want to get supernatural powers, and so you want to study about how to get special cities or abilities. That's not considered a good motive for listening to these teachings. If your focus is only on happiness in this life, still that's not the best motive for listening. If your motive is, I really want to find a lasting form of happiness that's going to last me even into future lives and beyond, then that's okay. That's a beginning level of a reason to listen to the teachings. The best motive is I want to become fully enlightened to bring all beings to freedom from suffering and ultimate form of happiness. If you have that motive and listening to these teachings, you'll get your biggest bang for your effort. That'll be the best motive to listen. All right, so now he's going to get into actually the first subject matter. Sam Rinpoche used to say, listening to Lam Rim, you should think of like having a coat with different pockets. And you can put different items into the different pockets. And so this is the beginning of the first pocket, which is called renunciation. And I'll say a little bit about what that means as we go through. Namdak means pure. Nganjung is the word that usually is translated from Tibetan into the word renunciation. But in terms of the actual word, it's not what it means in Tibetan exactly. Nge means definite. Jung means coming forth. So it can be better translated as definite emergence. So as I said last time, this is like a marquee of where we are. We're in this wheel of samsara, in the jaws of death, being born and reborn based on our karma into all sorts of different forms and existences. And most of them are quite painful, or quite fraught with problems. And so definite emergence means getting the insight that I'm kind of stuck in this bad situation. I want off this wheel. When you get tired of that sense of being born and reborn again and again, it comes to you, is there any alternative? And outside the wheel, of course, there's Buddha saying, yep, there's an alternative. I'm living it. It's good out here. you should come in. The water is good, right? So that definite emergence only occurs if you really contemplate this wheel and how you stay trapped in it. Which brings me to the Tibetan quote of today that's going to go through with you. I don't know, can you see this okay? So Bobby, do any of these letters look like you can read them?
Oh, I know all the letters. It's just stringing them together and making sense.
We'll start with this first one over on right there. That's sa ga sak. And then the next, I wish I could, yeah, there we go. Then bao cha sa che. So sak che. Sak means, in a way, stained. Che means with. So it means with stains. And then the next word, yer len, means closely. And then the word after that, kipumbo, means the heaps. The closely clinging, stained heaps, tainted heaps. Gundu means continually. Yang ne yang means again and again. Du, into. And then down here at the bottom line, that first syllable is len, and the next syllable is lempa. So taking again and again birth into these stained, closely clinging heaps. Ni means is like a colon mark. And then korwa yin, that is samsara. Koro means to spin. So spinning again and again into life after life with these closely clinging, stained heaps. That's another definition. We went through one definition of samsara before, but that's another definition. So what does that mean? When we take birth and we're not in control of it, usually, as I said, when we die, it's whatever karma is most intense or most immediate that overtakes the clear light mind and shapes it into what we're going to become. When we complete the intermediate state and we find a womb birth, if we're going to be human or an animal, or an egg birth, if we're going to be born as a bird or some other form of animal, or a miraculous birth in the hells or in the divine realm, when whatever our karma shapes us into becomes ripened, then we cling to the form that we've taken as if it's really us. And we try to protect it and we try to feed it until eventually it dies on us. And then we want another form. And so we cling again, and then it develops. And it's stained because anything that's born out of the delusions, ignorance, hatred, and desire, is tainted. It's stained, and it can't bring us anything but suffering. And so that's our condition when we're helplessly being born again and again in the round of existence. I know it sounds very bleak, but a Buddhist view is it is. You know, if you look in the news, almost any corner of the world, and would you really want to live there? You know, even most of us picture like a island in the Bahamas or something. That's where we're going to find peace. But even there, you know, there are insects and sometimes too much heat or monsoons or whatever. So when you contemplate all the flaws of cyclic existence, it can dawn in your mind that if there's an alternative to this kind of being born again and again and suffering again and again, maybe I should take it. When that thought becomes firm, then you've got Ngenjung, definite emergence, pure sense of I want out. Is there a way off this roller coaster? So here, Namdak Genjung Metta means if you don't have that sense of definite emergence or that sense of renunciation, Si Si is Sipa, which is another word for existence and also cyclic existence, samsara. Tso means the ocean of samsara. Samurai Rinpoche said that the ocean of samsara is way more vast and way deeper than the actual ocean. It's unfathomable how much it pervades the universe. So what Tsongkhapa is saying, without that sense of to definitely emerge from that, being helplessly drawn in and out of rebirth, Dendre Dunya Shiva Tamepa Tamela. Dendre Dunya Shiva Tamela. Dendre means happy results or happy fruitions. Durnya means longing for happy circumstances to arise. Shiva means to pacify that constant yearning. Tamela, there's no method to get rid of that. So what this is talking about is even though we're trapped in the cycle of existence, most of us have this constant yearning for that maybe I can find happiness. Like you see it all over the place. Like maybe I'll hit the lotto and I'll become a millionaire, and then all my suffering will disappear and I'll be okay. But we can see again and again people who are very, very rich, like these billionaires, and they still don't feel like they have enough. And they're still hoarding and they're still facing death and impermanence and all the sufferings of life. And so, as long as we're keeping that false hope, I'll call it false hope, that we're going to find satisfaction while we're trapped in this wheel, what Tsongkhapa is saying is we're deluding ourselves and there's no way out. If a prisoner is content with his gruel in his cell, then he's not going to seek to escape. He's not going to try to find a way out. And so Tsongkhapa is trying to tell us that if we do that, we're keeping ourselves in that cycle of existence. And then the next line, Sila Kampa. Si again is samsara, existence. La in samsara. Kampa means desire. Desire for samsaric happiness. Yi, yi kyung. Yi means mind. Kyung also, by that desire for existence. Luchen nam. Luchen means having a body. Right now, probably our most cherished possession is our body, right? We all cling to it. If anything threatens it, we're horrified, right? And that's how it is for samsaric beings. Their body is their most prized possession. Yet it ages, it gets sick, it deteriorates from underneath us, it causes us all sorts of pain, but we're totally clinging to it. That's our situation. Gune Ching means completely bound. By clinging to this, we're completely bound. Chir means therefore. Tokmar, in the beginning. Yangjun Sel means put effort into finding renunciation. That sense of the wish to definitely emerge. Yeah, Sharon.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I think it was Kampa Kung or whatever that it,
Gambe.
yeah, it does that mean like also clinging?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. The mind that clings. And
Yes.
that's what causes the close grasping to the aggregates. If you
Yeah.
think about it, if you want to be philosophical about it, at some point we were like a little organism in our mother's womb. Right? There wasn't a whole lot there to cling to, just a little few cells, right? It got fed, it grew, and now it became a big body. And it's basically borrowed substances. The substantial cause for it came from our parents, the unique substance of our parents. And the rest of it came from different food, whether it's been plant-based food or animal-based food, right? And that's been converted into a bigger and bigger, in my case, bigger stomach, right? But that's basically what our body is,
I
right?
think it happens to most of us, but anyway, having had a serious illness, um, I guess I actually went through periods of no longer wanting to cling. I don't know how to explain it. It was almost too much to wish for me to continue. So it was a lessons in impermanence, I think, for me. Um, but yeah, aging hasn't been real fun for me either.
Yeah. Well, and that's pretty universal. For some, it's worse than for others, but for all of us, we get older, we get ill, we lose our loved ones, and And there are a lot of people near the end of their life, they want to end their life, on purpose because they think ending their life will stop the suffering.
Yeah, that wasn't, what I was looking to do. It was, I didn't want to cling anymore. I don't know how to explain it. I just sort of,
Well, that's kind of again Jung. Um, the the claim from Vajrayana is that there's an alternative kind of body there. I mentioned the Rupakaya, the form body of a Buddha. There's a kind of form that doesn't suffer. The Sambhogakaya, that enjoyment body I mentioned, it doesn't age, it doesn't die. It stays until samsara is emptied. And so the Buddha is saying, hey, let me get you into one of those good bodies, those bodies that's deathless, that's beyond death.
yeah, I'm game for that, but I don't know. I think I have a ways to go.
Which is, I know that's a high claim, but I wanted to know that there's a whole body of teachings that's very clear on how to get into a body like that. Um, but first, you've got to get to the point where you're kind of, I'm tired of spinning. I'm tired of taking up bodies and then having to leave them against my will. I'm tired of sickness, old age, and death. How do I get free of this? Yeah.
So if you are enlightened, one is supposed to want to come back here to try to enlighten other people, right? So
Well, that's that's a bodhisattva's attitude. Yeah. So what were you going to ask?
because if you're tired of coming here and being reborn and death and old age, but there's a higher purpose of doing this.
Well, you bring up exactly on target with what's going to come in this poem. Really good question. This first point that Tsongkhapa is bringing up is the first aspect of the path, renunciation. And that's where you get disillusioned by rebirth and you want to be free of it. And there are sutras where Buddha says, if a person falls in a cesspool and managed to get out of it, what on earth would draw them back in? So, in other words, when somebody reaches renunciation and they're able to get free of rebirth, why would they go back? Right? And so in Lam Rim, there's an important concept. It's called a path versus a path in common. So if you take renunciation as your main path, then your wish is for, I want nirvana. I just want to be done. However, if you take it as a path in common, as a bodhisattva, I want renunciation because I don't want to be stuck in samsara, but I'm stuck just like everybody else is, and I can't bear the thought of them going through this without any help. So I'm going to not only try to get my own freedom, but I'm going to try to work for full enlightenment so I can help them too. And that's when renunciation becomes a path in common with the bodhisattva path. Does that make sense? It's a really important point. It takes a lot of courage when you start to see the situation we're in to take that bodhisattva path. But we'll come back to that.
Um, so um, in my search for spirituality, it began when I was in my 30s. And it's everything I learned was that if you want something so badly, then it's like clinging, right? Then you're not gonna get it. So I am trying to, not want to be enlightened, but I want to, improve myself as a person. So But I'm here, and I'm not in Gaza, and I'm not in Ukraine,
Yeah.
and I have a good life. I'm healthy.
Yeah.
So, and I think I believe I do good deeds. So when I am reborn again, am I going to go backwards for any reason?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to suggest that we come back to that. I'll say a little bit now, but we're at the end of our time. So I just want to say a few words on it to encourage you, but also to validate you. You're getting close to the Buddhist view, which is there's no certainty in samsara because it's so dependent on what karmas ripen and when they ripen in terms of what we become. There's no God saying, you're up, you're down. It's all because of the karma ripening within us that determines what happens, which is why when you realize this, there becomes a fierce wish to be free of it. That kind of desire in Buddhism is not considered a bad form of desire. The wish to extricate yourself from that round of birth and death, that's a healthy use of desire and fear within the Buddhist view of it, because it takes you in a direction that's going to help you long term. So there are forms of desire, because desire is a very powerful force in the psyche. There are forms of desire that aren't considered unhealthy to the spiritual path. There are some that are considered just entrapments. But that aspiration for freedom is considered a healthy desire. But we'll come back to this because it's a huge question and it's right on target. But I think we should probably stop, or we'll go too far over time. Is that okay?
Yes.
If we put that on the shelf and then we'll come back to it. All right. So I'll bring up the dedication prayers. And great questions. I hope you keep bringing the questions because I think it makes it interesting for everybody. Makes it interesting for me at least. Sashi bugi joje me to rira linje niende gemba de asange shindu me de wagi doku nanda shinga chuba jo idonguru rana mandala kamne yata yami. Gewa di gewa kun sunam yeshe zozo chin sunam yeshe lejin we daba kuni doba sho. So this prayer is wishing for those two Dharmakaya, Rupakaya bodies to ripen because of our virtue and wisdom, so that we can help all beings and be free ourselves as well. Jonju Zenjo Rinpoche, Mage Banange Geje, Gebanyaba Me Bayang, Gone Gondu Bawarsho. May the bodhicitta that we've develop more and never diminish. Gari Rawe Go Shingande Abendande or Malu Juene, Chenre Ziwan Denzeng Yazo Ye, Cheve Side Badu Tenger Chik. And that's a prayer for the long life of His Holiness Dalai Lama. Okay, we got through the third verse, but we're just starting it. My plan is each time we do a verse and to start the next class with questions about it, because like the one that Lucia brought up at the end is perfect. And so I'll try to keep it in mind for next time. All right, everybody,
Bye,
take care,
Wilson.
stay healthy.
Have a good week.
You too. Bye.